All right, it's Eldon back here with another episode of Crazy Dad's Garage on the Crazy Dad Camaro. So I've done a couple of things over the last few days, and I want to talk about what those things are and tell you a little bit more of the philosophy behind everything that we're doing. So you're going to see here that one of the things that I just did. Let's see, let's get down here. There's our good old trusty Camaro sitting there waiting for our renovation. Okay, so one of the first things that I did, and you should do this on every project really, is come over here. I've got a whiteboard, and I've just made myself a list of all the different little projects that we've got to do to get this thing where it needs to be, just so that I can keep track of everything, and it makes it easier to say, okay, what do I do next, and where do I spend money and everything. You're also going to see over here on this side, I've got a list of the expenses that I've gotten into the thing so far, and I'm going to talk about those again in just a minute. But I'm going to do a little bit of philosophy here on part of what we're doing. If you're going to go out there and create for yourself an inexpensive, fun, cool car, you've got to avoid probably the number one pitfall that I've had in my life, and that I've watched most guys who love cars and want to have a project have, and that is, so I talked about on the last video, is get a car that's running or almost running and complete, so that you don't have to mess around with all those expenses. But the second thing is, don't tear the car apart thinking I'm gonna tear this apart and restore it a piece at a time and move through it that way. That's the cause of more wasted old cool cars that sit in people's backyards and their barns and their garages than anything I've ever seen. Is the novice gets in there and thinks, I'm going to blow this car apart and I'm going to just fix every piece of it. And what happens is they end up never getting finished, because that accounts for a gigantic set of expenses, because every piece of a car that you start messing with, if you're doing it that way, you're buying a new part here and a new part there and all those kind of things, and it starts adding up quick. Literally back in about 1990, I was restoring a car for a guy, and this guy was a doctor and had an old Cadillac, 57 Cadillac, which really turned out to be a sweet car. And but he didn't, and I find most guys do this. They don't have a clue what a project's going to cost going into it. I'm gonna tell you about 2 or 3 projects here right off the bat. So while I was doing that car, fortunately this guy realized that it was going to cost quite a bit of money. And but there was another guy in our town who restored muscle cars, particularly Shelby Mustangs and stuff. And I happened to be in a conversation with him one day, and he told me, and this is back in 1990, guys, 30 years ago or whatever that is. He said, I can't even think about restoring a muscle car today without spending at least $20,000 on parts and supplies. And that doesn't count any labor. Okay? So you got to keep in mind, 30 years ago it cost 20 grand in parts. What's that mean today? It's a lot if you're going to tear one apart and do a ground up restoration on it and do it right. And so you need to think when you go into a project, if I would say never start tearing your car apart at that level unless you've got that 20 or 30,000 bucks sitting in the bank somewhere, because if not, you're just going to kill yourself. And what happens is it takes a lot of the enthusiasm for the project out of people, and they just give up. But anyway, there's so many basket case cars sitting around that start out as a decent car and somebody tore it apart, was going to restore it. But I made that mistake when I was in my early 20s. I picked up a really pretty cool old 54 F100. And it was not in the greatest of condition, but some guy had done some hot rodding to it, had a supposedly rebuilt motor in it, some decent wheels and tires and things, but it wasn't in super great shape. But I thought, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to throw a Nova subframe under it and those kind of things. And so I took a running truck, I tore it apart and actually got the subframe under it, but that's as far as that truck ever got. And to the best of my knowledge, that truck's still sitting in a guy's backyard down in Arizona somewhere, torn apart. Never got put back together. And I kept track of it for several years. I got to where I couldn't do anything with it, so I sold it to a friend, and he kept it for a while, sold it to another friend, and that's just what happens when we tear these things apart if we don't have our budgeting down and we haven't accounted for what's going to happen. So be leery of that. And so these are part of the philosophy that I'm talking about. Start with a car. Keep your expectations out of the show car territory to start with. If you're going to build a low buck car, you're not going to build a show car. You're going to build a fun car. And let's focus on what it takes to make a car fun, not what it takes on, to get it totally restored and do a frame off restoration and all that kind of stuff. We just can't do that on a budget. We'll talk about, I'll actually show you a couple things in some way later videos where you can build some really cool horsepower into a vehicle, but you're going to spend a lot more budget than what most guys want to have to start out with. And so that's why we're going to start here with the Camaro. So one of the things that I did in the last couple of days, I had to run from where I live to go a couple hundred miles up north, and I ended up passing about 4 pick-apart wrecking yards. And with this Camaro, there's still several of them in the wrecking yards. The nicest thing was I ended up finding one wrecking yard that had about 6 or 7 of them in it. Most of the others only had 1 or 2 if they had them. But I was able to go pick up some of the parts that I needed that are going to really help a lot in putting this thing back together. So we'll kind of flip through those real quickly here, and I'll show you some of the stuff that I was able to pick up. Okay, so let's start right here. Ended up finding this hood on a car in the wrecking yard. I found several of them. This was the only one that was really straight, and it happens to be green, and it's got some badly oxidized paint on it all too, so we're going to obviously have to include that in our paint job. I talked about the interior being in really bad shape in the car, so I ended up these Camaros, for whatever, the seats just get hammered in them. They're not real durable, and they wear out the upholstery on them. And I did a little research, and you can't find a decent driver's seat in the wrecking yard at all. And out of 4 wrecking yards that I found 2 passenger seats. And doing a little research, I found that I can take the upholstery and the cushions off of a passenger seat and swap them over to the framework of a driver's seat pretty easily on these. So I found these 2, and it looks like they came out of cars that were probably just driven by one person who put a lot of miles on it without any passengers in them, because these are really in pretty nice condition. So I picked up 2 passenger seats. We're going to put them, like I said, we're going to make that work for our seat situation. And then I come over here. We picked up, both the fog lights on my car are broken, so I picked these up for like $10 a piece at one of the yards. That driver's side door panel that has broken plastic on it and the switch is hanging out, I found the pieces I needed to fix that. And then I've got a big hole in the driver's side carpet on the floor, and I found a pair of factory door mats. The passenger one's in really good shape. The driver's side's, it's not great, but it's better than the hole that I got in the floor, and it beats replacing all the carpet. So I picked those up. I don't even know if they charged me for those things when I picked it up and paid for that. I mostly paid, I think, for the other parts that I got, so I might have paid $5 for those. Let's see. So I got all of those things. Also went into my local AutoZone, interestingly enough, and found a fuel pump. They were actually the same price as Rock Auto online, which is very rare. But I did pick up a fuel pump to stick in this thing. Now, I'm going to give you a word here on fuel pumps. A fuel pump's really tough to do even in the best of situations. And in this car in particular, it's terrible if you do it the way they tell you to. I'm going to show you a trick that I learned online here. But a fuel pump's hard to do. And so even though these crazy things are expensive, the counsel I got from one of my mechanic buddies who's been doing this for a long time, he says always buy a factory fuel pump from the same company that made the one for your car. Or this Delphi brand right here is a brand that I think is either a GM brand or it's one that they use a lot. There's also an AC Delco. But I'm at the point, if I am planning to keep a car at all, I will always buy a Delphi or a AC Delco if they're available. You spend about 50% more for them, but trust me, you don't want to go back in there and do a fuel pump a second time. It's just not worth it. And the fuel pump on these is actually down there under that hump behind the back seat. And to get it out from the bottom, if you get it out the way the factory tells you to, it's at least an all-day job, maybe a 2-day job for the average guy. But we're going to show you a trick here that should make that a little simpler. So that's kind of the parts that I've gathered up. We're going to get ready here, and probably the next video that we will do will be putting that fuel pump in. So I come up here, and if you can see my expense board here, getting the reflection there, it's not going to help a lot. But anyway, you'll see that right now with the cost of the car at $300 and these series of parts that I bought here. Oh yeah, I've got a window regulator ordered from online. That's the last thing on the list there. But right now we're sitting at $711, about $712 actually, on this car. And quite frankly, that's the bulk of the money that I'm gonna have to spend on it. That I'll spend another $200 or $300, I'm sure, by the time I get the paint job on it. And I do need a couple of new tires to get this thing where I want to get it. But guys, we're going to be looking at here what's going to be a really fun, kind of cool old car for $1,000 to $1,500 by the time we're done with it. I am totally stoked about that. And what, even though this thing's not a fire-breathing V8, it's going to be a lot of fun to drive, and it's going to look a whole lot cooler than my Buick Rainier that I drive, every day, or your little Toyota Camry sedan. And nothing wrong with those cars, but we're talking about cool stuff here. So anyway, that's kind of where we're at for this video, and I just wanted to reinforce to you, get a car that's complete if you're going to do a low buck job, and don't tear the thing apart any more than what you can fix in a day or two. We're going to have to tear it apart to get this fuel pump in there, but basically that's going to be a Saturday job. The worst thing I might have to do on this car is maybe do head gaskets, and for me that's a 2-day job at tops on a car like this. But I'm not disabling the car. Don't have stuff spread all over the place to find out, oh man, I can't even put this thing back together without spending $2,000 on it. So that's kind of where we're at, and that's an important philosophical thing if you're going to build a low buck cool car. So I'm going to wrap this video up right there. Really hope that you'll like and subscribe in the button down below, and become one of the guys that's following us on what we're doing here, because we're going to really open your eyes to a lot of things, and we're going to help you have a really awesome, really cool low buck fun car here.